Jim just mentioned the UAE is hosting the World Fair currently. For more perspective on COVID-19's impact on the event, my colleague Rachelle Akuffo spoke with Dr. Tulenko. She is the CEO of global health firm CORVUS Health. Dr. Tulenko begins with her take on new vaccination rules for people looking to travel outside the UAE.
To travel to the UAE, people are having to either be vaccinated or showing a COVID test that's negative within 72 hours. But what I think we might see with this explosion of Omicron in the Emirates, we might see that they narrow that window to showing a COVID test, a negative COVID test within 48 hours or even potentially 24 hours.
And we know that can be a tough turnaround for some of these testing companies. So we know a lot of missed flights have been happening during this time. Now, you mentioned some of the surges. How is the region faring overall in terms of COVID rates and vaccinations?
Well, originally the region was doing quite well. In fact, when the World Expo started in October, Dubai was seeing fewer than 100 COVID cases a day. Now that level is up to about 2,000, so close to 20 times more cases per day. But in general, actually, the region is doing well due to high vaccination rates and also low population density in general.
And we know it does cause a lot of bitter nails when you have a big event that's ongoing, and then you also start to see some of these surges. And we do know that despite the COVID concerns, the expo did kick off in October. It's scheduled to run through the end of March. Do we know how things have gone so far in terms of safety and sort of people willing to show up?
Up until now, it's gone pretty well. They've actually had close to 9 million visitors, 1/3 of them from outside the country. So that's actually quite successful. And, you know, people have to be, once again, vaccinated or show a negative test, and all the staff had to be vaccinated and wear masks. But it has been reported that, you know, in the last few weeks, social distancing and mask wearing wasn't being enforced as much. And also with Omicron being more transmissible, we saw a lot more cases. But I think even already the event has been a success for Dubai. I mean, the purpose of hosting an expo like this, it's not to make money, it's to showcase your country and your region to the world. And they've already had over 8,000 government officials visit, as I mentioned, 9 million people. And in some ways, this will be a lead up in the region to the FIFA World Cup, which is hosted in Qatar in the fall. And it shows that the Gulf countries are ready to host major global events. And that they're, starting to be outward looking and trying to get rid of that reputation of being more inward looking.
So then, as you mentioned, this preparedness that could also sort of help, as you mentioned, with the World Cup that's coming up. Is there a likelihood, there were some rumblings about the potential for either closing the fair early or perhaps, perhaps some sort of closures? What are you hearing?
Yeah. Well, I joke that there are two ways that COVID shuts things down. One way is that governments, shut events down because of the concern over COVID. The other way that COVID shuts events down is you don't have enough staff because all your staff are sick. And that's what we're seeing here, is that so many of the event staff have COVID or having to quarantine because of COVID exposure, that there's a concern that they don't have enough staff to give people the type of, top line experience they want them to give. That combined, of course, with, the ever-present concern of people getting COVID and being sick from it. So they haven't made an announcement yet, but it does look like most likely they'll shut down for a few days for what they say is deep cleaning and sanitizing. But we know that that's not going to make that much of a difference because even though COVID can be caught from surfaces, it's mainly caught through aerosols, through the virus floating in the air, and that's why masks are so important. So a lot of the announcements of deep cleaning is really just to try to reassure people it's more for show than actually reducing the true number of COVID cases.
And we do know that, whether it's at the mall or one of these big events, enforcement is such a difficult thing to do.
Yes.
Individuals don't want to have to, become like the mask police, having to ask people to make sure that they're masking. What sort of lessons or safety advice could you recommend, as you mentioned, for things like the World Cup coming up that could make it a safer event if you're going to have one of these large scale events?
Yeah, you could do a way to incentivize people to wear masks. For example, people are eligible to win raffles and they can't be eligible if they're seen not wearing their mask, or other maybe more creative ways. Certainly giving out free masks is always a good way. Having people sign agreements that they'll wear masks, or maybe having people put down certain deposits. There are more creative ways to incentivize people to wear a mask, because it is very uncomfortable for staff to have to try to enforce that. But we also do need to give staff sort of the type of words and what they should say to people, because there are better ways and there are worse ways to encourage someone to put their mask back on.